hair.
Oh, right. Yeah, so then we left the makeup girl behind today.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah, I think we're going close. Okay, we're ready to roll. 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay.
Right. We're rolling them.
Yep.
Right, action. Okay. How are you first attracted to libertarianism?
I was first attracted to libertarianism as a result of the progression of my political development as an undergraduate.
Sorry, can we just start again? It's just Doctor, when you moved to just like to your right, you kind of moved slightly off
Okay.
off camera, so there wasn't too much of a problem. Another thing is we've got too much light behind there. Adjust that.
Trouble with sitting on the rocking chair.
Yeah, that's right. You didn't pick up the door shutting.
Sorry. I didn't think that was too much of a problem.
No, that won't
we
be.
can't find that door because
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, yeah, we haven't turned the camera off, so I think we can.
We're still rolling.
Yes.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. How were you first attracted to libertarianism?
I was first attracted to libertarianism as a result of my normal processes of...
Okay. Just...
Okay.
I was first attracted to libertarianism as a result of my normal development politically. At the time that I was an undergraduate, I was an active member of the Labour Party, a socialist, and then I gradually realised that that was getting pretty more involved in the nanny state of everybody has to be dependent upon the state. And I was attracted to the ideas of the Liberal Party as an individualist. And the Liberal Party has always really been a coalition between two philosophical principles: one, disaffected members of other parties, and secondly, individualism. But then, with the advent of the Lib-Lab Pact, I found that perforce the Liberals were back in with the Labour Party, and the individualists of the Liberal Party really had nowhere to go. And it was only Mrs. Thatcher's individualism that really attracted me towards libertarianism as such. I'm very much a Thatcherite. I'm not sure that I would vote Conservative, but I'm very much a Thatcherite. And then finally, it was the two things that happened. One is I visited the United States and saw for myself what really could happen in a free country as opposed to the welfare state that we've had here ever since the war. And secondly, I read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, which just blew me away. That's a wonderful book, a philosophical work of the first rank. And libertarianism and I stayed firmly wedded together from that moment onwards.
Yeah, thank you. How are libertarian ideas reflected in your work with patients suffering from addiction?
In my work with patients suffering from addiction, there seems superficially to be a conflict between my libertarian ideas and actually trying to help the patients with addiction, because what's happening is that the patients are giving themselves a lot of trouble. And so, as Matthew Paris argued in the Times just recently, he would want to have the right to damage himself. And I can respect that view. However, the difficulty with people who are addicted to a substance or process is that they're not actually masters of their own minds. It isn't just a question of choice, it's a question of compulsion. Now, when somebody is compelled to do something, then I think there is a natural limit to libertarianism. That when they're compelled by their own internal brain biochemistry being faulty, which is what I believe is the origin of addictive disease, then it is a legitimate area of help, not for doctors to impose, but to certainly to offer. As far as the libertarian viewpoint, however, is concerned in general, I am, for example, a member of Forest. I'm one of their advisory council, the Freedom Organisation for the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco. Now, tobacco is the most addictive drug we've got, and it kills far more people than opiates ever kill. 15 people a day in the USA die of the effect of opiates, 350 die of the effects of alcohol, and over 1,000 a day die of the effects of nicotine. So no question about it, nicotine is the big drug of our society. And yet I remain a member of Forest because I believe in the right of people to enjoy smoking tobacco if they so wish, or for that matter, the right of people to enjoy taking heroin or cocaine or whatever. But as far as my medical side is concerned, there are people who get to the stage where they're taking things and they're desperate to stop but find that they cannot. Now this is the population that I'm interested in helping from the point of view of the addiction work that we do at the Promise Recovery Centre.
Thank you.
Okay, Martin, just one thing. Can we can you just angle the mic slightly up? I think it's dropped a bit since we've... Can you tighten it actually for this?
Is that okay?
Yeah, that looks a lot better. We can maintain it at that angle, and we're in good shape.
I think it's coming round. Is that?
Yeah.
How do you tighten it
There
up?
should be a toggle or something which you can just turn.
Okay, action.
Wait a second. 10 seconds, please. Just to let it get back onto speed. Okay.
Okay. What lessons can be learned by libertarians from your work in helping people to overcome addiction?
I think the most important lesson that libertarians can learn from the work that we're doing in addiction at the Promise Recovery Centre is to leave people to suffer the consequences of their actions. No addict is going to want to get better. No addict is going to want to say, oh yes, I'd like to spend some time in Alcoholics Anonymous, or I would like to go to a clinic to get off the stuff. They don't do that until they're in sufficient pain to say, oh my God, I've got to do something about this. And so if as libertarians we get sucked into the sort of helping process of saying, oh, I've got to help you out with your problems, be they financial, domestic, professional, health and all the rest of it. If we step forward and help somebody out of the mess that he's got himself into or she's got herself into, then we're not doing them a favour as far as addiction is concerned. We may be helpful as far as cancer is concerned, or influenza, or appendix, or anything else like that, but not as far as addiction. The addict will take all the help that's offered and more, and still go on. If you provide an addict with housing, you're actually providing him with more opportunity to use heroin or whatever, and that's not in his interests to do that. So the best thing for libertarians to do is to be libertarian. Let them suffer as the results of their own actions, until they come to us saying, I must have some help.
Thank you. What is your opinion of the critique of the medical profession given by such figures as Ivan Illich and Ian Kennedy?
I think it's very healthy that Ivan Illich and Ian Kennedy and others should give critiques for the medical profession from outside. We're not immune to criticism, and we're not immune to idiocy, and we've got plenty of idiocies of our own. Sometimes we see them for ourselves, and at other times we do need outside stimulus to challenge the ideas that we've got. I think nowadays, looking back on Ivan Illich, is a bit tame, and Ian Kennedy I found just angry. I don't think he was particularly constructive, but nonetheless, the ideas that both produced are things that we need to look at, and there'll be others, and we need to look at them too.
Thank you. What are the main problems involving the National Health Service?
The principal problem as far as the National Health Service is concerned is philosophical. It has not been defined for its purpose. And Ayn Rand, again, knew perfectly well what would happen to a health service. What she said was that the difference between a welfare state and a totalitarian state is merely a matter of time. And there's plenty of evidence to show that the health service functions like any bureaucracy. The more you put into it, the less comes out of it in terms of health care. And we've put in, for example, over the last few years, an incredible increase in the number of doctors, increase in the number of nurses, dramatic increase over inflation of the amount of money. And yet what's come out? Ward closures and a disgruntled profession and so on. Far from, producing a better quality health service, the increases have actually had the opposite effect. Now, where this has gone wrong, of course, is right at the start, in getting people to define what they want a health service for. If you say, well, the purpose of a health service is to give health to everybody, free, I say, well, that can't be done. It just can. How do you define health? Are you saying, when you say everybody should have it, do you mean to say rich as well as poor? Well, why? Why shouldn't you target the state or charitable services towards those who need the most help and to have the best capacity to benefit from the help that you're giving? You see, when you say that it's got to be free, well, what's got to be free? Cough syrups, aspirins? You stub your toe, you've got to have free treatment for that. Is there no limit to the nanny? Cannot people be helped to look after themselves, to take responsibility for their own actions over some things? So really the health service needs to sort itself out in saying these are the areas which society really ought to look after themselves. These are the areas in which we believe that professional help is appropriate, and we can discuss how it should be funded. And thirdly, this is the budget that we have, and this therefore is up to the medical profession or whoever else wants to be involved in the debate to apportion appropriately. For example, you could have a health service that had a gross income of just £100 million per annum. It doesn't make it a non-health service just because its budget is so small. What you then have to do is to say, right, what we can afford to do with this is, we can deal with congenital malformations of a particular kind, but we can't afford to look after cancers. We can't afford to look after coughs. We can't afford to run general practice. Do you see what I'm saying? It's forcing reality into the minds of the doctors themselves is the hardest challenge of all, and the government is up against that when it's talking about budgets and managed systems and so on. It's the doctors one has the biggest problem with.
Thank you.
Okay, hang on a moment. Can I just I'm just gonna Okay, can we continue?
Yeah. Should we roll on?
Yep.
Okay, this one follows on from the one up before. What would be a better way of running medicine?
I think a better way of running medicine would be to look at the prospect of an entirely insurance-based system or an entirely charitable-based system, or alternatively, which is my own personal preference, would be a system where you just have the patient paying the doctor. Now, I'd like to start this question again.
Sure.
Okay. I gave you the wrong answer and then was trying to dig myself out of the question.
No, it's fine.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah. Okay, so what would be a better way of running medicine?
I think what would be a better way of running medicine would be on a totally private basis. That where you've got a system where the patient pays the doctor, then the doctor has got to smarten himself up, or herself. The point is that in a fully private system, you have got to be answerable to the patients. You've got to provide care that the patient can afford, or that you can apportion through charitable donations in an appropriate way. And what's more, you don't get carried away with your own importance as the doctor. You don't distribute the largesse and think that how wonderful you are, and you don't have to think about money. Well, we do have to think about money. It may be vulgar, but that's what we've got to do. And we've got to think about patients. What does this person want? What does this person need? Is it reasonable? Is it appropriate? And so on. If you look at a book such as The Private-Public Mix for Health, published by the Nuffield Provincial Hospitals Trust, in each chapter was written by a doctor or another health worker in a particular country. So the Canadian system had a critique by a Canadian, and so on. What was my conclusion on reading that book is that doctors can wreck any health service of any type. An insurance-based service, you will tend to gravitate towards people charging too much. Their fees will go up and up and up because the insurance company is paying. A state health system, you'll tend to gravitate towards doctors doing less and less and less work. So they become progressively more work shy. You put up the number of doctors, down the number of patient responsibilities, and so on. So those are the extremes. I'm not saying that every doctor in a state system is lazy, nor that every doctor in an insurance system is avaricious. I'm not making that point. I'm just saying that those will be the overall effects over a period of time of those types of systems. And as I say, the only system that I would really value would be one in which doctors get hungry if they don't do the work. Doctors get hungry if they don't answer the patients. Doctors get hungry if they're not polite. Just lose the patients. So that's the way that I would like to see things develop. And I believe that, before the National Health Service ever existed, we had people who were more than prepared to say, well, this patient hasn't got any money, so I won't charge him. And hospital doctors who'd say, well, we will earn our money on the private sector, and then we will treat people for free in the state sector. Now, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I would like to see a division in that way, so that people who needed the most care were the ones that were most likely to get it. In our present health service, someone like me is fully entitled to everything. Well, why? Why should I? I'm middle class, I'm intelligent, I'm rich, I'm all sorts of things. Why should I have the same opportunities in the National Health Service as someone who has none of those things? I don't want to see a health service targeting people who are the best able to demand services such as me. You know, the health service, it runs most effectively for middle class people. And that's not right. We should target it towards people who really have not got the capacity to look after themselves very well. And we should help them primarily. And I think the private sector can do that. Private and charitable sector can target people who really need the most help.
Thank you. What would happen to those who could not afford to pay for medical treatment under such a system?
I believe that the most frequent argument that's put against the private sector is that, you know, what would happen to those who can't afford to pay? They say, but what about them? What about them? And yet, you see, what they're showing is that they themselves, I hope, actually care for the people who can't afford to pay. I do believe that we actually have a very caring society. I don't believe I'm the only doctor that has ever said, but what about those who can't afford to pay? I think the vast majority of doctors are concerned in that direction. If, for example, we had a totalitarian system where I had no choice but to work in a state sector, I myself would want to look after addicts and alcoholics, as I do now. But you can't exactly say they're the easiest part of the whole spectrum of clinical care. They're among the most demanding and the most unrewarding. Now, why would I do that? You know, for the money? You must be joking. You know, one does the sort of clinical work that one wants to do. That's why one became a doctor in the first place. And what is so damaging about the state is that it forces you into compartments. You don't have the freedom to really choose what diagnostic equipment you could have, what type of service you'd run. You have to apply to the committee. And the committee says, well, our policy, in conjunction with the British Medical Association, our policy is... You say, well, how am I going to be able to do what I believe in? Oh, well, you have to join the BMA and you have to become, or the Royal College, of course, and it'd take you 20 years to become, influential, and by that time you've forgotten all the ideas you ever had. So I believe that the people who have the least capacity to afford treatment, again, are best helped in a fully private system, allied to fully private charity. We have got a compassionate society we want to give to help people. I mean, look at the Wishing Well campaign of Great Ormond Street. Raised phenomenal amounts of money. Look at the amount of money that's given to the blind, and so on. This is over and above the National Health Service. These are private donations over and above our state system, which is funded out of taxation. We've got a good society, we're nice people, and we can harness that within the private sector, I think, much more effectively than within a state. If you look at what actually happens in a state system, the government takes money from Peter, messes around with it, gets administrative charges and all sorts of things, and then gives Peter back less than he had in the first place. Well, why didn't Peter just go and get his own health care and pay for it that way? Oh, you couldn't do that because the doctors would rip him off. Well, supposing you had a fully private system and the doctors were ripping people off, what would happen? Peter would go to a different doctor. If in a fully private system doctors are answerable to their patients, they will very quickly get a reputation of being either fair or unfair, avaricious or kind and generous, good or bad. And the bad will go to the wall, and the better ones will survive. The most wonderful thing about capitalism and about libertarianism is its creative nature. That it has the built-in system. What you do not do is to bail out the failures. You let them go to the wall. You let the bad doctors disappear. You let the avaricious doctors burn themselves out, by taking too much money. They rot themselves. Don't bail them out. Let them go so that patients get better care.
Thank you. What is your opinion of the critique of the concept of mental illness given by Dr. Thomas Satz?
Thomas Satz criticized the whole concept of mental illness And many others have done the same, and I would certainly do the same. One of the books that I'm enjoying at the moment is Jeffrey Maston's book called Against Therapy. You know, the idea that the therapist sits there with a capital T, and he has these profound insights, or she, I mean, you know, plenty of female therapists as well, have these profound insights that he's able to impart to the poor little patient and give them, you know, lots of nodding of the heads and ums and all sorts of other profound things like that. Or alternatively, you've got the other extreme, where you've got the white-coated doctor who's dishing out pills, saying these are going to be good for you. You can become a zombie. You know, so I think that criticism of mental illness, or the concept of mental illness, is highly apposite, very appropriate. We have got to be very, very careful on what we define mental illness as being. After all, if you ask someone like Vladimir Bukovsky what mental illness is, someone who's been in a totalitarian state and called mentally ill because he was a dissident, I think you'll find that his attitudes towards mental illness are vastly different from those of people who've never been in such situations. I remember an occasion once when a group of my own professional colleagues said to me that they felt I needed mental help. What was I doing? I was criticising the existence of the National Health Service. And because I had the audacity to say that I thought the concepts of the health service were wrong, not that it was just underfunded or mismanaged, but that the ideas were wrong. Because I believe that if the government gives the services of the doctor to the patient, the government is taking the credit for the work of the doctor. The doctor becomes fed up with it. The patient doesn't say thank you to the doctor, instead he says thank you to the government. The government's saying vote for me and I will give you free teeth, free health, free everything. And the patient is saying, yeah, make that doctor work. And the doctor finishes up saying, hey, what the hell, I'm not going to do this for him. And so you've got the whole concept, the philosophical concepts of the health service, I believe, are wrong. But because I had the audacity to say that, rather than to say, we're underpaid, we're overworked, they said I was mentally ill. Well, I don't mind being told I'm wrong, or that they've got better ideas. I'd be excited by that. But to say I'm mentally ill? No, that's not right. Now, if I'm using that example of where I've been on the receiving end of it myself, imagine what somebody without my power as a doctor feels when they're told by a doctor that they are mentally ill. Now, that's a terrifying responsibility. I don't agree with you, therefore you're mentally ill. The way that you're behaving is aberrant. You don't behave in the way that I believe society should be run. You are therefore mentally ill. Oh no, I think Thomas Satz and many other people have very legitimate concerns over the whole concept of mental illness. William Glasser, the author of Reality Therapy and Control Theory, of whom I'm a particular fan, again, he applies his ideas not only to health but also to education. There's one school founded on his ideas in upstate New York, in Johnson City, where the bill for vandalism in a 2,000 comprehensive type pupil school was $50 last year. Now you see, in this country, if you had a £50 bill for vandalism in a 2,000 pupil comprehensive, it'd be unthinkable. See, because we've got so many children who are delinquent, we've got children who are this, that and the other, all variants of mental illness of a kind. It's simply not true. We give the children the responsibility and the respect, and they will run the place themselves better than we can. But that's Bill Glasser's ideas, and we're not ready for them yet.
Thank you. Do you believe that physicians should have a legal monopoly in dispensing medicine?
One issue that comes up, of course, is whether doctors should have the monopoly of prescribing medicines and drugs and so on, because there are people who say that the libertarian position should be that anybody should be able to take anything. It's their own choice. Well, in the first case, I think it depends how you define medicine. There are many areas in which medicines, quite dangerous medicines, such as aspirin, are purchasable over the counter. Aspirin is a major dangerous drug. A lot of people die from taking too many aspirins. Paracetamol, the minimum lethal dose of paracetamol is 30 tablets. Well, you can go across the road now and buy 100 of them without any difficulty. Nobody would raise an eyebrow. So, you know, the concept that doctors alone should prescribe dangerous drugs is already completely flawed. Homeopathic remedies, for example, can be prescribed by anybody. They're not restricted to doctors' prescriptions, and yet there are people who would argue that they were more valuable, or more certainly less dangerous than many of the things that doctors prescribe. So the whole concept that only doctors should prescribe medicines is already flawed anyway. But let's look at the bit that people would be concerned about. And should anybody be able to just go in and buy a heart drug, for example, digitalis? People will say, but I've got a fast heartbeat, and therefore I need something to help me with my heart. Now the doctor hopefully would be able to say, actually, your fast heartbeat is to do with your anxiety, or to do with what you've just eaten. You had too much caffeine or curry or whatever. And so that's the reason that you would have those symptoms, and you're wrong in thinking it was your heart that was wrong, and therefore you would have been misguided to take the digitalis. So there is a point in having drugs which have significant effects like that, restricted to people who really do know. One would hope that society would accept that and would say, we would like these drugs to be restricted so that our children and so that we ourselves are being examined properly by responsible people and giving the drugs appropriately. And that, of course, is why we have a General Medical Council, which restricts the register of people who come on to the medical profession and so on. And the next argument is about addictive drugs and so on, the heroin, the cocaine, the cannabis and all the rest of it. Why should society make some divisions that only these drugs are prescribable and that only those drugs are legal and these ones are illegal and those ones are not prescribable and so on, all these divisions? Well, they're always artificial. They're always a question of dividing the line somewhere, saying this is where it's going to be. And that dividing line is never going to be totally accurate. I believe that the principle is what is in the patient's best interests. Now, you see, I'm falling into the same trap myself. I'm saying that I, as a doctor, have a better vision than other people. Well, I think within, narrow criteria, I think that is my profession. I do have a responsibility to know more about drugs than other people. I do have a responsibility in my work with addiction to protect people from their own sins. Yes, I do. Now, but it's available for dispute. You can challenge me on that.
Thank you. What are the legitimate limits of medicine?
I think the legitimate limits of medical practice are that it should be patient-centred, not doctor-centred. That we should be answerable to our patients. And that's why I was saying that really we need to be hurt in our pockets. It's the thing which, take it or leave it, affects us most. If I'm not going to be able to eat or to pay for my mortgage, I'm going to have to smarten up. So the basic limit on medicine should be that it must be patient-centred. The patients must have the power. Now, what I do not say is that they should have the control. I do not believe, for example, in community health councils determining what doctors should do, or some ethical committee with Ivan Illich and Ian Kennedy and the rest sitting on it saying, we believe in, for example, euthanasia, therefore you, doctor, will kill this patient. Well, like hell I will. But I don't believe it, and I'm responsible for my actions, thank you very much. I'm not going to take my orders from a committee. So I believe that doctors, by the very nature of their work, have an individual and personal total responsibility for their actions. As an individualist and libertarian, I am responsible for me, and I'm responsible for what I do to or for you. I can't disguise it behind a committee, saying, oh, I was told to, I was only obeying orders, all that stuff. No, I'm responsible. And so my limits on my power are that I must be answerable to you as the patient. That I must be able to show you why I believe such and such a process would be in your best interests. Because otherwise we'll be back into totalitarianism all again, and I'm not going back into the Labour Party again. It's just not going to happen.
Right, thank you. That's the questions as we've got written. I don't know whether you'd like to make any...
No, I'm fine on that.
Points?
Great, I think that was fine.
God,
Doctor, I hate to take up any more of your time. I mean, I'm sure everything will be okay. I mean, should we finish now? But I was just wondering, because the mic was sort of dropping slightly, I mean, it might be slightly different in sound quality between those first two questions and the second.
I tell you what, I felt that went so well,
yes,
I'd stuff the sound, stuff the quality, what I said, I got spot on.
I think so. Yeah, it was absolutely superb. I say.
And I was, it's just a rare thing that it happens. When you get it right, let's leave it.
Yes, okay. No,
Don't you
I'm
think?
sure it's fine.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, I
sometimes
feel it
you never
would-
know.
Yeah,
but-
I'd love to have a copy of that.
Of course.
Yeah,
Oh yes.
okay.
Well, when we finish the program,
Goody.
we'll send you. And if you like, we can make a copy just of your whole interview. Obviously,
I'd like that.
purely because of time constraints, we won't be able to have the whole of the interview.
No,
but
indeed. Yeah.
you know,
Take what you want, but if you can give me a copy of the whole interview, I'd like that. And
No
give
problem.
a copy to Chris Tame with my compliments.
yes, of course. Yes, well, he's obviously been interviewed in the program as
Yeah,
well,
sure.
so he's very much involved with it. And
Righty.
okay, well, thanks
Okay.
very much indeed
Thank you.
for giving us your
Thank you.
time in
Well,
this way. And
Yeah.
Well, I wish you well in your project. As you
Yeah.
can tell, I totally support what you're doing.
thanks very much. Thank you. Well, we'll send a copy when it's finished. It'll
Thanks.
initially be a sell-through video being distributed to people who are interested.
Yeah.
And